Good afternoon. This is Henry Keane on UATV English, bringing the hard truth in easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. Roads blocked, flights cancelled, all military reserves available were pulled in, petrol stations out of petrol, residents sweeping out food from the stores. Moscow was getting ready for the siege. Russia, a terrorist state led by the terrorist and a war criminal, was on the brink of a civil war instigated by a terrorist and a war criminal. Glued to their mobile phones, millions of Ukrainians spent a sleepless night on Friday after the head of the Wagner mercenary group declared war against his rivals in the Russian military, sparking unprecedented political turmoil in Moscow. On Saturday morning, when news on Wagner's insurrection circulated, many Ukrainians struggled to believe it was real until footage shared online appeared to show Wagner troops with tanks, armored vehicles surrounding government buildings in the Russian city of Rostov-on-Don, where Prigozhin claimed to have taken over an army space.
So when they tell you that the PMC Wagner interfered with the work and that's why something fell apart at the front line, that's not why it fell apart at the front line. A huge amount of territory was lost. Soldiers killed 3 to 4 times more than it is filled at the top in the documents. And what is filled is 10 times less than what they say on TV.
The start of the Ukrainian counteroffensive finally destabilized the Russian elites, intensifying the internal split that arose after the defeat in Ukraine. Today we are actually witnessing the beginning of a civil war, said Mikhailo Podolyak, advisor to the head of the office of the President of Ukraine. Ukraine's military intelligence spokesperson, Andrei Yusov, in turn said Wagner's sanctions in Russia were a continuation of intra-Russian conflict that are consequences of the military aggression against Ukraine. This is a sign of the collapse of the ruling regime, and this process will intensify, he added. That said, I do not think there is a reason for me to speculate on what is going to happen next. No one knows, but one bare fact is obvious though.
Anyone who chooses the path of evil destroys himself. He sends columns of troops to destroy the life of another country, but cannot stop them from running away and betraying them when life resists. He terrorizes with missiles, and then, when they are shot down, he humiliates himself to be given Shahed drones. It despises people and sends hundreds of thousands to war, to eventually barricade itself in the Moscow region against those it has armed. Russia has long masked its weakness and stupidity with propaganda, and now there is so much chaos that no amount of lies can hide it. And all of this is due to one man, who again and again frightens us with 1917, although he is not able to lead to anything else at all. Russia's weakness is obvious, a full-scale weakness. And the longer Russia keeps its troops and mercenaries on our land, the more chaos, pain and problems it will create for itself. This is also obvious. Ukraine is able to protect Europe from the spread of Russian evil and chaos. Let us maintain our strength, unity and power. All our commanders and soldiers know what to do. Glory to Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Let us just try to make sense of it all. And while we're doing our best to do that, it is worth to be looking at this marvelous work by Ukrainian artist Mikita Titov, impersonating the modern Russian version of an ancient mythological snake where a boar is devouring its own tail, which is probably the best illustration of the Russian Kremlin and the dead end it has pulled itself in. Enjoy. And let us go facts only. First, what's done cannot be undone. Wagner Group founder Yevgeny Prigozhin launched a mutiny against the Russian Ministry of Defense this weekend, taking over the southern military district headquarters in the Russian city Rostov-on-Don, before turning towards Moscow. Then, just as suddenly, he halted his advance without a violent confrontation. Hours after charging Prigozhin with treason, Russian President Vladimir Putin agreed to drop the charges, and Prigozhin goes to Belarus, whose dictator Lukashenko negotiated the whole deal. Whatever was the reason for all that Russian mayhem, what does it all tell us about the stability of Putin's regime and its war in Ukraine? Prigozhin's armed rebellion most certainly indicates a political crisis within Russia and shatters the myth of Russia's invincibility and overwhelming power, obviously. Whatever arrangements Prigozhin has extracted from this, Putin's authority is diminished, as was Gorbachev's after Boris Yeltsin defeated the coup. And this is worse. In 1991, the coup failed, but Prigozhin seems to have pulled off something. It's like Prigozhin looked behind the screen at the Wizard of Oz and saw the great and terrible Oz was just this little frightened man. And not only he saw that with his own eyes, but he clearly showed it to the rest of the world. So what can be added to it? Perhaps just one thing that was tweeted by Alexei Danilov, Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council. As the war began, so it will end inside Russia. Amen to that. On 21st, 22nd of June 2023, the United Kingdom jointly with Ukraine hosted the International Ukraine Recovery Conference in London. It is a continuation of the cycle of June annual events, with the last one conducted with Switzerland in Lugano. The previous conference, held for the first time during the ongoing Russian aggression against Ukraine, launched the Lugano Principles, which laid the foundation for the reconstruction process of Ukraine and united the world in its efforts. The Ukraine Recovery Conference is dedicated to Ukraine's transformation and was symbolically launched in London in 2017 as the Ukraine Reform Conference. U.R.C. 2023 was focused on mobilizing international support for Ukraine's economic and social stabilization and recovery from the devastating aftermath of this war, including through emergency assistance for immediate needs and financing private sector participation in the reconstruction process. Conference has brought participation of the international community, international financial institutions, the private sector and civil society to mobilize support for Ukraine. We continue to implement a rather ambitious reform agenda and look for ways to support investment in Ukraine while reducing risks. There are some results already. The US will invest $1.3 billion for power system repair and modernization of critical infrastructure. Great Britain will invest $3 billion as a 3-year loan. France announced €40 million as additional financial assistance for Ukraine 2023. Germany, €381 million for additional humanitarian aid. European Investment Bank, €840 million for infrastructure restoration. The European Union will cover 45% of all Ukrainian needs for financing its recovery until 2027. This includes grants, loans, and frozen assets of the Russian Federation.
The eyes of the world are looking at us and at whether we will defeat Russian aggression exactly as freedom deserves to win, that is, without compromising our values. Also, the world is watching to see if we will restore normal life in such a way that our transformation will land an ideological defeat on the aggressor. We protect Ukraine, and thus we protect freedom. And when we build Ukraine, we'll build freedom. Country, region, continent, world. It's a global task.
The cost of rebuilding Ukraine and modernizing the Ukrainian economy may reach $500 billion within the next 10 years. Total annual expenditures can reach more than $110 billion to finance all of this. The size of the economy must be significantly larger than what we have now in Ukraine. The goal can be achieved only by developing the private sector and creating conditions for investment, according to the Center for Economic Recovery. It is quite clear with the big business and governments. But for the private sector, the question remains, will we in Ukraine be able to create that wow effect to tell private business to invest in a post-war country with all its mayhem and risks and, to put it mildly, imperfections in law, tax, social, you name it? The answer is yes. We just have to. We have to kill corruption by means of a new, improved law. Dura lex, sed lex. Ukraine continues its counteroffensive operations and our forces are successfully moving ahead, although President Volodymyr Zelensky has acknowledged battlefield progress was slower than desired. That said, we have taken 8 settlements in Eastern Donetsk region and south of Zaporizhia and at least 113 square kilometers. That means 44 square miles since the counteroffensive started on 4th of June. The Ukrainian military push is not going easy because 200,000 square kilometers, which is more than 77,000 square miles of Ukrainian territory, had been heavily mined by Russian forces. Fighting is also continuing around the city of Bakhmut, what is left of it, which is under Russian control after the longest and so far the bloodiest battle of this war. The US-based Institute for the Study of War says Ukrainian forces had recently made limited advances in this area. They also note that Ukrainian forces are intensifying efforts to strike Russian ground lines on communication in southern Ukraine. The two parallel Konar bridges, the shortest route from Crimea to the front line in the south, were both damaged. The crossing is an important link to the occupied city of Melitopol, which lies on the coastal route from the Russian border across southern Ukraine to Crimea and is thought to be one of the targets of Ukraine's counteroffensive. The enemy collaborator and Russian-installed governor in the occupied Kherson region said they would be repaired quickly and that no one had been hurt. Sure thing, as it always is with Russia, no one hurts and no one is left behind. Just somehow, one fine day, things go south. This time, the south of Ukraine. Russian occupiers claim that a bridge linking Ukraine to the Crimean Peninsula, which Russia annexed in 2014, Ukraine has attacked with long-range British missiles, Storm Shadows. I mean, Russians are lovely at claiming things, aren't they? Putin claimed he'd never go for a third tenure. He did, even for the fourth one. And he even changed the country's constitution for that. Russia claimed it would never breach Ukraine's territorial integrity in exchange of Ukraine's nuclear arsenal, but Russia did. The Kremlin claimed it did not down MH17 flight and killed all passengers on board, but they did. Russia claimed it was not them in Bucha, in Mariupol, but it was them. Russia claims now it did not blast the Kakhovka Dam, but 10 days before the explosion, Russian parliament adopts a decree banning any future investigations on any of hydroelectrical facilities they've captured on Ukrainian territory. So they were getting ready for this, and they did it. And still claiming they're not. And now they're planting explosives at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, as you are watching this. So search yourself what to believe in when it comes to Russia claiming things. But whatever your choice will be, remember, Russia has instigated this genocidal war and brutal aggression against us, Ukraine. They're claiming they are not them, but it's them. So when it comes to some storm and some shadow upon a perpetrator of this brutal crime, well, à la guerre comme à la guerre. And one more thing. You can't even imagine how many times a day we are being asked the question, how's it going with your counteroffensive? What is going on the battlefield? On the very front line. And every time I hear that question, I pick up my phone and I pretend to be on a call with Chief Commanding Officer of Ukrainian Armed Forces, Valery Zaluzhny. Valery, then I'm like, yes, it's me, Henry Keane from UATV. Yes, look, Valery. There's John Smith standing next to me. Oh, I know you're too busy with our counteroffensive, but John insists. He wants to know. Can you put the whole thing on hold for a moment for us and tell John Smith that the rest of the world now we're doing how we're doing? Oh, and Val, do us a favor, will you? It'll better be all good news because the world invested in Ukraine, so it kind of expects a report. What's the return on investment? Viktor Frankl, a Jewish person who survived the Nazi death camp and became a world-known psychiatrist, once said that during that awful time in that camp, not those survived who believed this terrible time will be over soon and they will get out of this terrible place. Nor did those survived who believed it never will be over and they will never get out alive. But those survived who swept the floor. Breaking this hard truth into easy terms for you, do what can be done. Simple things, but do it every day, at all times, at any cost. Sweep the floor. And we're doing what needs to be done, at enormous cost, by the way. We understand you want a good story, a victorious march of Ukrainian counteroffensive army in shining armor right to the Kremlin walls, but we need no Kremlin. We need no Russia's land. We need Russia out of ours. And we are literally sweeping the floor. So whatever I say about counteroffensive or those storm shadows does not matter really, does it? What does matter, though, is what you want to believe in. If you have not chosen yet, remember, the best of us in Ukraine give our lives to win the war we never started. The war on our land, the war for our survival and our freedom. While Russians give their lives for nothing more but the outdated Soviet imperial ambitions of Comrade Putin. And one last thing on the matter, for those of you being not satisfied with how fast Ukrainian counteroffensive meets your expectations, I hate to break it to you like this, but it never meant to. We have an army, and its commander, Valery Zaluzhny, who has probably the best experience in planning military operations in the world. However, if you have any suggestion and consider yourself a military expert, just as well, leave a comment below. If we find it funny enough, I promise we will send it to Mr. Zaluzhny. One thing is obvious, even talking about going nuclear shows clearly how much is going wrong for Putin in Ukraine. Putin has made a lot of mistakes. As The Economist puts it perfectly right, I quote from here, "Mr. Putin's first mistake was to underestimate his enemy. Perhaps he believed his own propaganda that Ukraine is not a real country but a fake erected by the CIA and run by crooks who are despised by the people they govern. If he expected Ukraine to collapse at the first show of Russian force, he could not have been more wrong." So even if once there was a plan in Putin's head, things went seriously south since then. South of Ukraine, the Zaporizhia region, the nuclear power plant to be precise, because it is not a question if Putin will blast a nuclear facility or not. The question is when the world will stop letting itself be blackmailed. Listen to Rafael Grossi, you know, the guy that looks like a director general of the world's biggest atomic energy international body, but acts like a virgin on a school's night out.
Our assessment of those particular placement was that while the presence of any explosive device is not in line with safety standards, the main safety functions of the facility would not be significantly affected. We are following the issue with great attention. Rafael Grossi, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Dear Mr. Grossi, I wonder if the nuclear power plant was planted in Russian mines and it would be located within a 100-mile zone from your own house. Would you still call them Russian mines planted there a safety measures? You know what? Let's call things your way, Grossi way. Like death is not death, it's just the absence of life. In Bucha, it was no genocide, it was a conflict. Mass graves full of dead civilian Ukrainians, men and women and children, just a reason for peace talks, since the faster it all ends, the better, right? Calling things what you want won't turn them into what you want. You can't call it all you want, but mines planted near nuclear reactor is a goddamn outrageous thing and an absolute opposite to what responsible people call a safety measures. So it makes it two of you, Mr. Grossi, you and Vladimir Putin, who in a seizure of cowardice and political impotence seem to twist the objective reality so harshly that it becomes its own opposite. And that makes you an accomplice of what is going to happen, whatever happens.
Я нагадую тим, хто забув, це найбільша атомна станція в Європі.
I remind those who have forgotten that the Zaporizhia nuclear plant is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. Everyone in the world, the International Atomic Energy Agency, all countries, all leaders knows exactly what is happening there. Russia uses the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant as an element in its aggression, occupies the station, covers with the shelling of neighboring cities. They keep weapons and soldiers there. Now our intelligence have received information that Russia is considering the scenario of a terrorist act at the Zaporizhia nuclear plant, a terrorist act with the release of radiation. They have prepared everything for this.
And that actually brings us to more on UATV. I simply love the question by Liam CZ8TO. What can be done to prevent these Russians from doing what they did to Kakhovka HPP to the Zaporizhia NPP? Well, let's clarify. If you look at this question from the government's and international society point of view, I do not know what to answer without falling into severe profanity. And it seems to me that the best experts in the world are thinking over this dilemma and looking for options. Let's hope they will find it. But if we look at it from a personal point of view, then the answer is simple. Get those Russians out of here. Help us to win the war. Don't pray for us. Send our army $1 every month instead. Say a word for Ukraine where and when you can. Don't trust the Kremlin ever. Deoccupy your mind from the idea that there are always two sides of things. Yes, there are. But there are no sides of anything that allow you to invade a neighboring country, kill people, blast dams, blackmail the world with a nuclear catastrophe, and force it to negotiate. Be honest and call things what they actually are. Use the right terms. Genocide in Ukraine, blackmail, Russian aggression, terrorist state, and international thug at large and usurper Vladimir Putin say no to any halt to this war. Don't let the Kremlin's full paradigm idea of Russian exceptionalism rule. Don't feed the dragon, slay it. Grasp it once and for all. The appeasement of the Kremlin's monstrosity is no way to peace, and only will let Putin grasp the only thing in return he is able to the world agrees to sacrifice Ukraine. Understand that political impotence of Western politicians sometimes is the Kremlin's beloved weapon, and on contrary to Director General of the Atomic Energy Agency Rafael Grossi say that mines at nuclear plant are anything but a safety measures. Demand from your politicians to have political balls, so they not only talk about democracy and freedom, but they really stand for it when necessary. We in Ukraine die for our universal humankind values, while the world is uncomfortable with goddamn petrol prices and still buys Russian oil, diamonds, and narratives. Stop it. Change it. Here and now. For yourself. And don't tell yourself it cannot be done. And we will get them Russians out of our lands so to make sure all Ukrainian nuclear facilities are safe. It was me, Henry Keane, on UATV Ukrainian State Channel, hoping to explain that our truth in easy enough terms for you today. Like, comment and subscribe. Ask us a question in the comments below and we will do our best to answer it online. Thank you. Stay safe. Tune for more.